Before we dive deeper into an understanding of the structure and function of your brain, I want to offer you a look at the life and work of the greatest creative genius of all time, the #1 role model for the use of human potential. Who is it? In the groundbreaking bestseller, Busan's Book of Genius, my friends Tony Buzan and co-author Raymond Keene offer for the first time an objective ranking system for history's 100 greatest geniuses. When I ask my students around the world for their choice of the greatest genius of all time, the #1 answer corresponds to my own choice and the selection of Buzan and Keene: Leonardo da Vinci. Da Vinci was world-class as an anatomist, architect, artist, botanist, city planner, costume and stage designer, chef, humorist, engineer, equestrian, inventor, geographer, geologist, mathematician, military scientist, musician, painter, philosopher, physicist, and raconteur. I've been trying to figure out how I and how you can think in the manner of this great genius. To me, he's the ultimate model of excellence. So, what are the keys to his unparalleled intelligence? How can you apply his approach to learning to put your own creative genius to work? To get you started, I've abstracted 7 core principles for thinking a la Leonardo. The principles are: questionare, a questing, insatiably curious approach to life; dimostrazione, a commitment to test knowledge through experience by practical demonstration; sensazione, the continual refinement of the senses, especially vision, as the means to clarify experience; sfumato, a willingness to embrace ambiguity, paradox, and uncertainty; arte scienza, the development of the balance between science and art, logic and imagination, whole brain thinking; corporalità, the cultivation of fitness and relaxed concentration; and connessione, a recognition and appreciation for the interconnectedness of all things and phenomena, also known as systems thinking. What I'm going to do now is take you through each principle in depth, illustrate it with a quote from the master's notebooks, and then I'm going to give you a specific suggestion for putting the creative genius of history's greatest creative genius to work for you. So the first principle is questionare. And as I go through these principles, I want you to say them out loud. Say it out loud. Questionare. And make a good hand gesture. Pretend you're Italian. Questionare. Lord Kenneth Clark called Leonardo da Vinci the most curious man who ever lived. Da Vinci was so curious, he refused to take yes for an answer. The content of our thoughts, our behavior, and ultimately the quality of our lives is a reflection of the questions that engage our minds. As we've seen, in the first few years of life, our minds are engaged in an unquenchable thirst for knowledge. From birth, and some would even argue before birth, the baby's every sense is involved in exploring and learning. As soon as they're capable of speech, children start asking question after question after question. The greatest minds go on asking questions with the same passionate intensity throughout their lives. A good example comes from one of Da Vinci's notes in one of his notebooks. He wrote, "I roamed the countryside searching for answers to things I did not understand. Why shells existed on the tops of mountains along with the imprints of coral and plants and seaweed usually found in the sea. Why the thunder lasts a longer time than that which causes it. and why immediately on its creation, the lightning becomes visible to the eye while thunder requires time to travel. How the various circles of water form around the spot which has been struck by a stone, and why a bird sustains itself in the air. These questions and other strange phenomena engage my thought throughout my life. Da Vinci's childlike sense of wonder and insatiable curiosity, his breadth and depth of interest, and his willingness to question accepted knowledge provided the wellspring of his genius. So how can you put this to work for you? Well, you can, like Leonardo, facilitate this quest by keeping a journal. Record your questions, observations, insights, and musings. You can do an audio tape journal, a laptop computer journal, or the traditional kind. You know, business tends to drive us toward hard conclusions and measurable results. But there's something about the exploratory, free-flowing, unfinished, non-judgmental practice of journal keeping that encourages the pursuit of open-ended questions, freedom of thought, and expansion of perspective. Principle number 2, dimostrazione. Say it out loud. Dimostrazione. If Da Vinci hadn't been born out of wedlock, or perhaps if his father was a little bit wealthier, then the young Leonardo probably would have been sent to university for an academic education. Fortunately, he went instead to the studio of the master painter and sculptor Andrea del Verrocchio. Here, Leonardo was immersed in learning a range of practical crafts and skills. For the rest of his life, he proudly referred to himself as uomo senza lettere. That means man without letters. He also called himself discepolo dell'esperienza, disciple of experience. This is from his journal. He wrote, "To me it seems that those sciences are vain and full of error, which are born not of experience, mother of all certainty, first-hand experience which in its origins or means or end has passed through one of the 5 senses." For him, truth was the fruit of direct experience. You can put the Da Vincian principle of dimostrazione to work for you by learning to heed your own experience. Professor Weston Agor, author of The Logic of Intuitive Decision-Making, found through extensive interviews that senior executives overwhelmingly point to a failure to heed their own experience as the prime cause of their worst decisions. Too often, business people allow their better judgment, based on experience, to be overruled by analysts, attorneys, and academic authorities. It's amusing to note, however, that in the world of business, the word academic is used frequently as a synonym for irrelevant. Think about it. People say, that's an academic issue, and they mean it's totally irrelevant. Mark McCormick, the founder of the International Management Group and author of What They Don't Teach You at Harvard Business School, describes the limiting mental set that can be created by academic training that doesn't emphasize dimostrazione. He writes, "A master's in business can sometimes block an ability to master experience. Many of the MBAs we hired were either congenitally naive or victims of their business training. The result was a kind of real-life learning disability, a failure to read people properly or to size up situations, and an uncanny knack for forming the wrong perceptions." My friend Bennett Goodspeed once said, "If Thomas Edison had had an MBA, he would have tried to invent a bigger candle." Now, don't get me wrong, some of my best friends are MBAs. But even when you're an MBA or a PhD, you've still got to learn to rely on dimostrazione. The best leaders and managers know, like Leonardo, that experience is the heart of wisdom. Principle number 3, sensazioni. Say it. Sensazioni. Molto bene. Da Vinci believed that the secrets of experience are revealed through the senses. He regularly cultivated and refined all his senses. His vision, for example, was particularly keen. In his Codex on the Flight of Birds, he recorded observations that remained unconfirmed and not fully appreciated until the development of high-speed photography. As a master chef, Da Vinci cultivated the sense of taste, yet Da Vinci reflected sadly that the average human being looks without seeing, listens without hearing, touches without feeling, eats without tasting, moves without physical awareness, inhales without awareness of odor or fragrance, and talks without thinking. So to put the principle of sensazione to work for you, and to live a full, rich life, cultivate all your senses daily. Practice describing your environment in detail. Note nuances of color, varieties of shape, pattern, perspective, and texture. Bring special attention to gradations of light and dark. Savor every aroma and taste every bite of your food. Write a poem about your next glass of wine. Listen with the rhythmic awareness of a musician, touch with the sensitivity of the blind, and move with the sensuousness of a tiger. In business, sensory awareness translates into the ability to read body language, facial expressions, and voice tonality, critical skills in effective negotiation and people management. Strengthen these skills by following Da Vinci's advice. He wrote in his notebooks, "See to it that you watch and consider other men's postures and actions as they talk, argue, laugh, or scuffle, their own actions and those of their supporters and onlookers, and make a note of these with a few strokes in your little notebook, which you must always carry with you." Principle number 4, sfumato. Say it out loud, sfumato. The Mona Lisa and a number of Da Vinci's other paintings are imbued with a hazy, mysterious quality that was one of his trademarks. Critics call this quality sfumato, literally translated as going up in smoke, or more simply as smoked. This effect is obtained through the painstaking application of hundreds of gossamer-thin layers of paint, and it's a marvelous metaphor for the man and his life. Da Vinci's life and work are smoked with paradox and ambiguity. He's the most prolific genius of all time, yet much of his work remained unfinished. His paintings reflect life-affirming celebration of transcendent natural beauty. Yet he was also fascinated with ugliness and the grotesque, designing enthusiastically hideous machinery of war. Da Vinci left sprawling, copious notes on every aspect of his work while revealing almost nothing about his personal life. Scholars debate the originality of many of his scientific and engineering discoveries and the authenticity of a number of his paintings, the nature of his sexuality, and many other questions. Perhaps the most famous debate of all focuses on the identity of the Mona Lisa. Was she, as biographer Giorgio Vasari claimed 30 years after Leonardo's death, the wife of Francesco del Giocondo? Was she a duchess or the mistress of a nobleman, as some of the literature suggests? Or was she a composite of the peasant women and streetwalkers that Leonardo spent hours observing and sketching? Dr. Lillian Schwartz of Bell Laboratories has resolved this controversy and in the process illuminated the fundamental role of paradox in Da Vinci's worldview. The model for this most famous of paintings is none other than the master himself. Applying sophisticated computer modeling with precision measurements of scale and alignment, Schwartz compared the Mona Lisa with the only existing self-portrait of the artist, drawn in red chalk in 1518. As she describes it, Juxtaposing the images was all that was needed to fuse them. The relative locations of the nose, mouth, chin, eyes, and forehead in one precisely matched the other. Merely flipping up the corner of the mouth would produce the mysterious smile. The Mona Lisa's smile is the perfect example of sfumato, this quality of paradox, of mystery, of ambiguity that was at the heart of Da Vinci's life and work. So how can you put the principle of sfumato to work for you? Well, in the 1980s, the American Management Association did a study of the most effective managers. They found that the very best American managers were distinguished by two qualities: their ability to make intuitive decisions and what the AMA called a high tolerance for ambiguity. Well, I'll tell you what, nowadays, tolerance for ambiguity isn't enough. I mean, you don't want to tolerate your life, you want to enjoy it. We live in a time of unprecedented accelerating change, and as change accelerates, ambiguity multiplies and illusions of certainty become more difficult to maintain. The ability to master ambiguity and paradox can no longer be only the province of geniuses. Poise in the face of uncertainty must become part of our everyday standard of effectiveness at work and at home. Develop your genius quotient by cultivating confusion endurance. Practice patience in the face of uncertainty and embrace creative tension. I mentioned earlier that the tension between your vision and your current reality, the ability to hold that tension, is one of the secrets of awakening your creative genius and achieving high performance. In the business world, the way this plays out is in the planning process. We make a plan, it's thoughtful, it's carefully considered. And then things happen, changes take place that we never could have expected. The businesses that are able to improvise, to change on the fly, as they say in hockey, are the ones who make the adaptation and come out ahead. They learn to thrive on creative tension, to embrace ambiguity, not just tolerate it. That's the core lesson of the sfumato principle. The next principle is arte scienza. Say it with me. Arte scienza. Ah, molto bene. Was Leonardo a scientist who studied art or an artist who studied science? Clearly, he was both. His scientific studies of rocks, plants, flight, flowing water, and human anatomy, for example, are beautiful, evocative, expressive works of art, not dry technical drawings. At the same time, the plans for his paintings and sculptures are exquisitely detailed, painstakingly analytical, and mathematically precise. In his notebooks on the process of painting, he cautions potential painters as follows: those who become enamored of the art without having previously applied to the diligent study of the scientific part of it may be compared to mariners who put out to sea in a ship without rudder or compass and therefore cannot be certain of arriving at the wished-for port. So how can you put the principle of arte scienza to work for you? Well, if you've ever seen Da Vinci's notebooks, you know they're filled with images, pictures, symbols, and key words. You can awaken your latent Da Vinci-esque capabilities by learning and practicing mind mapping. Mind mapping is a whole brain method for generating and organizing ideas, originated by Tony Buzan and largely inspired by Da Vinci's notebooks. All you need to begin mind mapping is a topic, a few colored pens, and a large sheet of paper. Follow these guidelines. Begin your mind map with a symbol or a picture representing your topic in the center of your page. Starting at the center opens your mind to a full 360 degrees of association. pictures and symbols are much easier to remember than words, and they enhance your ability to think creatively about your subject. Use keywords. Keywords are information-rich nuggets of recall and creative association. For example, if you were making a mind map on the ideas of Leonardo da Vinci, you might start with a little sketch of Da Vinci in the center, and the keywords you'd have thus far might be questionare, dimostrazioni, sensazioni, sfumato, arte, scienza, corporalità, and connezioni. Connect your keywords with lines radiating from your central image. By linking words with lines, you show clearly how one keyword relates to another. The lines that radiate out from your central image are like branches of a tree, a natural, organic way to connect ideas. You'll also find that printing your keywords makes them much easier to read and remember. So print your keywords and print just one keyword on each line. By printing just one keyword on each line, you free yourself to discover the maximum number of creative associations for each keyword. The discipline of one keyword per line also trains you to focus on the most appropriate word, enhancing the precision of your thought and minimizing clutter. Another tip on mind mapping is to print your keywords on the lines and make the length of the word the same as the line that it's on. This maximizes the clarity of your association and encourages economy of space. To get the most out of your mind mapping, use colors, pictures, dimension, and codes for greater association and emphasis. You can highlight important points and illustrate relationships between different branches of your mind map. You might, for instance, prioritize your main points through color coding, highlighting in yellow the most important points, using blue for secondary points, and so forth. Pictures and images, preferably in vivid color, should be used whenever possible. They stimulate your creative association, and as you learned in the mnemonic exercise, they greatly enhance your memory. You can use mind mapping to write business plans, conduct performance reviews, prepare presentations, and run meetings more effectively. Mind mapping can help you with personal goal setting, vacation planning, interpersonal problem solving. Mind mapping can be particularly valuable in improving your children's performance in school. The most marvelous application of mind mapping, however, is that through regular practice, it trains you to balance arte and scienza, to be a more Da Vincian thinker. The next Da Vincian principle is the principle of corporalità. Say it. Corporalità. Leonardo's physical gifts complemented his intellectual and artistic talents. A number of scholars have suggested that his passion for anatomy was a reflection of his own extraordinary physicality. Among the citizens of Florence, he was renowned for his poise, grace, and dexterity. He was tremendously skilled as a horseman, and his strength was legendary. He was reported to have bent horseshoes with his bare hands. A vegetarian and accomplished chef, Da Vinci believed that a thoughtful diet was a key to health and well-being. Walking was his preferred form of daily exercise, although he was also an expert fencer. In his anatomical notebooks, he speculated, this is amazing, 500 years ago, he speculated that arteriosclerosis causes aging and is the result of a lack of exercise. Da Vinci also cultivated the balanced use of both sides of his body, painting, drawing, and writing with both hands. He was truly psychophysically ambidextrous. How can you put the Da Vincian principle of corporalità to work for you? Well, nowadays we all know that regular exercise is not only a cornerstone of physical health, but also of your mental powers as well. So to help you actualize your potential as a Renaissance man or woman, I've included in a later portion of the program a complete approach for you to develop your own corporalita, an approach that will cover diet, exercise, rest, and the development of relaxed concentration. The seventh Da Vincian principle is the principle of connessione. Say it with me, connessione. For Leonardo, everything was connected to everything else. The hairs on the head of the angel he painted for Verrocchio's baptism, his study of the Star of Bethlehem flower, his sketches of horses for the Sforza monument, and the torrents of water in his depiction of the deluge all mirror his insights into a universal pattern. He writes, "Nothing originates in a spot where there is no sentient vegetable and rational life. Feathers grow upon birds and are changed every year. The grass grows in the fields and the leaves on the trees, and every year they are, in great part, renewed. So that we might say that the earth has a spirit of growth, that its flesh is the soil, its bones the arrangement and connection of the rocks of which the mountains are composed, its cartilage the tufa, and its blood the springs of water. The pool of blood which lies around the heart is the ocean, and its breathing and the increase and decrease of blood in the pulses is represented in the earth by the flow and ebb of the sea." For Leonardo da Vinci, the greatest genius of all time, all of creation was woven together, a beautiful, infinite tapestry of creativity. So how can you put the principle of connessione to work for you? Well, we live in a time of specialization and fragmentation. So it's important to make a concerted effort to look at your life, and especially all of your life goals, and see how one connects to another. In other words, I'm suggesting that you look at your life from a systems perspective. You know, it's all too easy to go through life without comprehensively considering what you want. Sure, we all think about our careers, relationships, and finances from time to time, but rarely, if ever, do we contemplate all our goals and how they connect together. Contemplate the following questions. Do I have a clear set of goals? Are my goals ecological? Do they all connect together and support one another? What are my priorities, values, and guiding principles? Do my goals connect with my principles and values, the things I really care about? Does my current mode of working, relating, learning, loving, relaxing, and budgeting time and money contribute to the achievement of my goals? What activities, people, and places bring out the best in me? What is my life's purpose? Am I traveling my own true path? Am I enjoying the journey? You'll notice that we've come full circle. To access the principle of connessione, you've got to start again with the principle of questionare, questioning your goals, looking at how they connect or don't connect, thinking about your values, your principles, and your purpose. A lot of people say, well, I have no idea what my purpose is. I mean, it's to survive. It's to, feed my family. And that is part of your purpose. But you've got a purpose well beyond that. And it's true, it's not, unfortunately, handed to you with your birth certificate. It's something that requires deep reflection. The secret to accessing your purpose is to keep on asking the question, what is my purpose? And waiting, listening, intuiting the answer. If you keep on asking with the power of questionare, your purpose will become apparent. I want to tie together this piece on Leonardo da Vinci by reading you something that he wrote in his journal. What's unusual about this segment from his journal is that it contains a very rare expression of his personal feelings. Listen to this. drawn by my eager wish, desirous of seeing the great confusion of the various strange forms created by ingenious nature, I wandered for some time among the shadowed cliffs and came to the entrance of a great cavern. I remained before it for a while, stupefied and ignorant of the existence of such a thing. With my back bent and my left hand resting on my knee, and shading my eyes with my right hand, with lids lowered and closed, and often bending this way and that to see whether I could discern anything within. But this was denied me by the great darkness inside. And after I stayed a while, there arose in me two things: fear and desire. Fear because of the menacing dark cave, and desire to see whether there were any miraculous thing within. So here's the greatest genius of all time, caught between fear and desire. Leonardo's legacy is the inspiration for desire to triumph over fear. In his never-ending quest for truth and beauty, art and science were married through the ministry of experience and perception. His unique synthesis of logic and imagination, of reason and romance, of arte and scienza has challenged, inspired, and baffled scholars throughout the ages. History's greatest master of science and art has achieved the status of myth. In this time of specialization and fragmentation, Leonardo da Vinci stands forth as a beacon of wholeness, of connessione. In the earliest human societies, thinking was primarily animistic and right-brained. Native people experienced themselves as one with the earth. Every tree, every animal, every cloud possessed its own sacred spirit. Mother Earth reigned. As human societies evolved, the feeling of oneness with nature was gradually replaced by the need to control the environment. Analytical thinking began to dominate, and paternalistic societies pushed Mother Earth into the background. Now we require a new synthesis, not a back-to-nature movement or a continuation of our short-sighted resource squandering, but rather a new integration of technology and soul, power and altruism, business and humanness. Our success and fulfillment as individuals and our continuing survival and evolution as a species demand that we cultivate a new way of thinking, that we move beyond either-or, win-lose, us-them ways of looking at the world. This approach is so important that I was inspired to make up a new word to express it. The new word is synvergent. Synvergent thinking is the synergetic integration of convergent and divergent thinking. Let me explain the roots of the word synvergent. The word is made up of an integration of the word convergent or converge, which means to tend to come together at a point. Diverge or divergent means to go in different directions from a common point. Convergent thinking is focused, analytical, detailed. It's the primary mode for balancing your checkbook, copy editing a manuscript, or pruning a tree. Divergent thinking is diffuse, free-flowing, and imaginative. It's the primary mode for spontaneous humor, brainstorming, and free association. Synvergent thinking is the synergetic combination of convergent and divergent thinking. It's the primary mode for thriving with change, ambiguity, and paradox. Learning to embrace change, paradox, and ambiguity is the touchstone of a creative life. As F. Scott Fitzgerald once suggested, the test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold two opposing ideas in mind and still function happily. The synvergent thinker holds multiple pairs of opposing ideas in mind simultaneously and still functions happily. Most people don't know when they're anxious. They react to anxiety with some form of automatic avoidance behavior such as excessive talking, reaching for a cigarette, or fantasy. To surf the tsunami of change, we must learn, first of all, to know when we're anxious. As we become conscious of our anxiety, we can learn to accept it, experience it, and free ourselves from limiting compulsions of thought and action. The willingness to make inner changes, to let go of the vestiges of old habits, anxieties, and outworn paradigms is a prerequisite for synvergent thinking. Change management, like time management, begins with self-management. We must accept responsibility for living our priorities and managing our attitudes in the face of circumstances which are often beyond our control. To face change with equanimity, we must find something inside ourselves that is unchanging. Of course, this work isn't easy. As Emil Sinclair pleads in Hermann Hesse's Damien, "All I ever wanted was to live from the promptings of my true self. Why was that so very difficult?" To be true to ourselves, we must shine the light of consciousness on deeply grooved habits, engaging in a relentless process of questioning that leaps the pitfalls of narcissism and self-indulgence. As the great mystic Meister Eckhart said, "Man must strive with all his might to become what he really is." One of my favorite tools for introducing people to synvergent thinking is the model of the two hemispheres of the cerebral cortex. Although information on the brain's hemispheres has received a great deal of popular attention, it's frequently misunderstood and misapplied. Let's review it and update it, focusing on how to apply this understanding to improve the quality of your life at work and at home. Professor Roger Sperry, who won the Nobel Prize in Medicine and Physiology in 1982, conducted much of the original research in this field. In the early years of his work, he and his colleagues discovered that, in most cases, the left hemisphere of the cerebral cortex processed convergent thinking: logic, language, mathematical reasoning, attention to detail, sequence, order, and analysis. The right hemisphere seemed to process divergent thinking: rhythms, colors, and shapes, daydreaming, imagination, and synthesis. Most folks seem to have a tendency for one of these two modes to dominate. If you're thinking, "I need more evidence. Where can I obtain the original research papers? How exactly did Sperry ascertain his results?" Well, then you're probably a left cortex dominant individual. If instead you're thinking, "Cool, this feels right to me," you're probably more right brain dominant. Similarly, if you wish this program contained a test complete with checklist and scoring system so that you can better determine your dominant mode, you're probably the more analytical type thinker. And if you don't really like those sort of things because you already know what you are, well, then obviously you're more intuitive. Since the early days of Sperry's research, a tremendous amount of work has been done on the two hemispheres. It now appears that the left hemisphere is capable of performing many of the functions of the right and vice versa. The left-right dominance dichotomy seems to hold true for only about 90% of right-handed people and 60% of left-handers. The others have either a reversed or unclear dominance pattern. Researchers also have found different brain dominance patterns in people who rely on pictographic writing, such as the Japanese. There are also key differences between women and men. Women have a better developed corpus callosum, the network of nerve fibers that connects the hemispheres. This might explain why women often seem to be more in touch with their intuition. Researcher Justine Sergent suggests that the left hemisphere is responsible for processing things that are smaller in the visual field, such as the tiny writing of many engineers, and that the right hemisphere is responsible for things that are larger in the visual field, such as pictures, hence the association of right hemisphere with artistic awareness. An exact understanding of the two hemispheres still awaits us. Meanwhile, it's probably best to think of left brain and right brain as metaphors for convergent and divergent thinking, respectively. For our purposes, the important thing is that wherever they are located and whatever our tendency in terms of dominance, our highest level of functioning is realized when we synergize these two modes. Of course, our society often pays lip service to the idea of the balanced Renaissance individual, but in practice we suffer from a pandemic of half-witted thinking. As Peter Senge points out, from a very early age, we're taught to break apart problems, to fragment the world. This apparently makes complex tasks and subjects more manageable. But we pay a hidden, enormous price. We can no longer see the consequences of our actions. We lose our intrinsic sense of connection to a larger whole. Without the balancing influences of intuition and awareness of a larger context, left cortical thinking paralyzes intelligence and perverts common sense. Many of the frustrations of everyday life are caused by systems that attend to the parts while missing the whole picture. I recently witnessed a classic example on a trip from Dulles Airport in Washington, D.C. The euphemistically named mobile lounge that was transporting 30 of us to the midfield terminal broke down about halfway to the terminal. We were informed that we were not allowed to just get out and walk the rest of the way to the terminal because of insurance regulations. And a lot of the folks who were trapped in there with me were getting pretty agitated because their flight time was approaching. More than one of the folks on board pleaded with the driver, radio ahead and at least let the airlines know that we're held up here so they can hold the flights until the repairs are completed. Well, after a delay of about 20 minutes, we finally arrived at the terminal, and a lot of the passengers discovered that their flight had just left. I saw a group of them confront the agent in charge, and the agent responded that he didn't get the message. And I actually heard him point out to this little group of upset people that, and this is a quote, "The airline and the airport authority have nothing to do with one another." Indeed. Left brain imbalance has infected every aspect of public life. Our legal system, government agencies, and many corporations are drowning in oceans of overregulation. Obsession with order and control has become a kind of psychosis that destroys common sense and good judgment. So our society in general, and therefore many of us as individuals, suffer from this left brain psychosis. In the words of Professor Sperry, the fellow who did that original research into the two hemispheres of the brain, he wrote, "What it comes down to is that modern society discriminates against the right hemisphere." Sperry wrote those words in 1973, and the phenomenon still holds true. So let's talk about what all this has to do with business. Today, businesses are demanding that people be more creative, accountable, and adaptable. We need folks who are empowered. But hiring and promotion still tends to be based largely on left brain credentials. To compete effectively today, individuals and organizations must cultivate balance. Professor Henry Mintzberg of the McGill University Faculty of Management points out that the most effective executives integrate analytical input with holistic intuitive thinking skills. He emphasizes that successful executives are capable of reveling in what he calls a climate of calculated chaos. Professor Agor from the University of Texas in El Paso has studied thousands of managers in business, government, and academia. His textbook, Intuitive Management, Integrating Left and Right Brain Skills, also emphasizes the importance of the balanced brain. Agor suggests that the most successful organizations blend engineering with what he calls imagineering. After testing hundreds of managers, consultant Jacqueline Wunder, author of Whole Brain Thinking, found that the finest managers are able to transcend their natural dominance patterns, flexibly employing both modes as a situation demands. She emphasizes that the most effective leaders are able to shift left when writing reports or analyzing data, and then shift right when brainstorming or counseling a subordinate. Since 1978, I've worked with thousands of managers at all levels. Some are disciplined, analytical, serious, thorough planners, focused on substance. Others are flexible, intuitive, playful improvisers, focused on process. But the very best are those who balance discipline and flexibility, analysis and intuition, seriousness and play, planning and improvisation, substance and process, balanced brains, synvergent thinkers. In the book, When Giants Learn to Dance, Professor Rosabeth Moss Cantor describes some of the common challenges faced by modern citizens of the organizational world. Think strategically and invest in the future, but keep the numbers up. Be entrepreneurial and take risks, but don't cost the business anything by failing. Continue to do everything you're currently doing even better, and spend more time communicating with employees, serving on teams, and launching new projects. Know every detail of your business, but delegate more responsibility to others. Become passionately dedicated to visions and fanatically committed to carrying them out, but be flexible, responsive, and able to change direction quickly. Speak up, be a leader, set the direction, but be participative, listen well, cooperate. Throw yourself wholeheartedly into the entrepreneurial game and the long hours it takes, and stay fit. Succeed, 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 and raise terrific children. Stephen Wright sums up the challenge of living with mixed messages this way. I bought a humidifier and a dehumidifier, put them in the same room, turned them on, and let them fight it out. I don't know who won, but everything's nice and shiny. Reconciling the contradictions of modern organizational life isn't easy. In addition to a lively sense of humor, we've got to learn to be leaders and managers simultaneously. Before you can integrate these skills, let's clarify the difference between them. Webster's defines leadership as the ability to show the way by going before or along, the capacity to lead. Webster defines manager as one who conducts affairs with economy and frugality, a good economist, one who is skilled in contriving, planning, or intriguing so as to accomplish his purpose. Professor John Kotter of Harvard Business School and others have emphasized the important distinction between management and leadership. Managers focus primarily on controlling complexity, monitoring performance, guiding systems, planning budgets, and supervising the implementation of plans. In other words, the primary mode of the traditional manager is convergent, oriented toward stability. The leader's primary focus is divergent, oriented to change. The leader is charged with framing and communicating the vision. Perhaps the most important tool of communication is the example the leader sets. Leaders assume responsibility for guiding organizations into the future. The key to long-term success is to integrate the skills of leadership and management. Balancing leadership and management is as important at home as it is at the workplace. As a parent, you've got to be both a leader and a manager. You've got to guide the culture of your family, creating and nurturing a vision of possibility for your children, and most importantly, providing a living example of that vision in action. At the same time, of course, you've got to manage the household, monitoring performance and adhering to budgets. Leaders are often compared to shepherds. A shepherd must be out front, guiding the flock in the right direction towards greener pastures. But if there's no one checking in the back, the sheep can be caught in brambles, fall into ditches, or be eaten by wolves. A manager needs to walk behind the sheep and count them, control them, monitor their progress. If we have only management, we might have our full complement of sheep, but they could wander into the wrong pasture or even fall off a cliff. If we have only leaders, we might arrive at the right pasture, turn around to find there's only 3 sheep left. Stephen Covey compares the function of managers to individuals hacking their way through the jungle. The leader's the one who climbs up a tall tree and shouts, "Hey, wait a minute, wrong jungle." All too often the response of the managers is, "Shut up, we're making progress." We've got to find a way to be flexible enough to lead from the front and watch the back of the flock, to climb the tall tree, take the broad view, and then hop down and help cut the path. Warren Bennis says, managers do things right, leaders do the right things. But to balance leadership and management, we've got to do the right things right, synergetically integrating convergent and divergent perspectives. Of course, there's a considerable gap between the theoretical understanding of the idea of the balanced brain and the actual habits of balanced thinking and living. You can accelerate your own evolution of a more balanced brain and create the context for developing synvergent thinking by doing the following: taking time for solitude, appreciating those with different brain dominance, recording your dreams, increasing your word power by developing your vocabulary, avoiding cliches, euphemisms, and political correctness, and transcending sexual stereotypes. Let's look at each one of these in more depth. So we'll talk first about the importance of taking time for solitude. Solitude gives you the opportunity to get your head together. So every day, take just a little bit of time and go for a walk or just sit and meditate by yourself. And once a year, no matter how hectic your life, escape for a day or two by yourself. The intellectual and spiritual benefits of taking time alone will flow throughout the rest of your year. As important as it is to take time for solitude, we can also stimulate our creative thinking by interacting with others, particularly people who think differently from us. So, take an artist or an accountant to lunch. Aim to see the world from the point of view of someone who thinks differently from you, rather than judging others as flaky and weird or nerdy and narrow. It's all too easy to spend our lives surrounded by people from similar backgrounds who think in similar ways. Although this can be reassuring, it's not very stimulating to our creativity and growth. As you open your mind to unfamiliar perspectives, you stretch and tone your synvergent muscles. Another marvelous tool for stimulating your creativity and growth is to remember and record your dreams. In a study at the University of British Columbia, students signed up for a course on dreaming. At the beginning of the term, they were given an extensive battery of creativity tests, followed by just one assignment: to record their dreams and discuss them with fellow students during class time. At the end of term, the students took another battery of creativity tests, and their scores improved by more than 25%. Niels Bohr, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, Salvador Dali, René Descartes, Carl Jung, Edgar Allan Poe, and many others point to dreams as the wellsprings of their genius. Elias Howe, the inventor of the modern sewing machine, got the idea for putting the eye at the end of the needle instead of the middle where it was previously placed from cannibals who were boiling him for supper in one of his dreams. The cannibals had little holes at the ends of their spears. Remembering your dreams is easy. Before you go to sleep, say to yourself, "Tonight, I will remember my dreams." As soon as you wake up, allow yourself to drift for a few minutes with your eyes closed, scanning your mind for pieces of your dreams. Note the elements of your dream in your journal or in a special dream diary. Don't expect them to make sense right away. Just note down the images, scenes, keywords, or phrases that the dream suggests. A great tool for doing this is mind mapping, which you were introduced to earlier. If you want to interpret your dream, pretend that you're talking to the world's greatest psychiatrist and that she keeps asking you, "So tell me, what does this dream mean to you?" Remembering and recording your dreams helps to capture and focus the power of your divergent mind. But balance also demands that we strengthen our convergent powers. One of the best ways to develop your convergent thinking power and your overall intellectual capability is to develop your word power. Philosopher Francis Bacon once said, "Men imagine that their minds have command of language, but it often happens that language bears rule over their minds." So how can you build your word power? Well, the most obvious thing is to increase your vocabulary. The average person has a regular active vocabulary of approximately 1,000 words, with the ability to recognize another 3,000 to 5,000. Shakespeare's active vocabulary was over 25,000 words, and Goethe is the all-time record holder with an active vocabulary of over 50,000 words. Aim to learn one new word a day and make a habit of looking up words that you aren't sure of from your daily conversations or reading. Once you've looked them up, begin using them. Thought is largely dependent on words, and the more you know about words, the richer and more precise your thinking. So, another great tool for developing word power is to study the derivation of words. For example, the word derivation comes from the Latin de, meaning from, and rivus, meaning stream or river. As you learn derivations, you increase the depth and imaginative power of your stream of associations. William Faulkner once wrote, "I don't know what I think until I've read what I've written." One of the best ways to develop your thinking is to practice writing. The discipline of writing forces you to take responsibility for your thoughts, to test the way one thought flows into another. Get hold of the Elements of Style by Strunk and White and make it your Bible for learning how to write. Effective thinkers do not indulge in euphemisms and the language of political correctness. The word euphemism comes from the Greek root eu, meaning pleasing, and pheme, meaning speech. So a euphemism is something that sounds good even though it probably isn't good. A recent issue of the Quarterly Review of Doublespeak, published by the National Council of Teachers of English, offered the following examples of euphemistic and politically correct insanity. The Clark County, Nevada Board of Education has declared that pupils with GPAs lower than 70 will no longer be referred to as borderline or failing, but rather as emerging. Students averaging A's will be told that they are extending rather than being praised for outstanding or excellent work. And students in the middle range of performance will be characterized as developing rather than as average, passing, or acceptable. I'm sure that no one in this school is ever expelled. Instead, the school probably expedites students' progress towards alternate life pursuits. Oh, by the way, if you're invited to a workforce imbalance correction, career readjustment, mandatory outplacement, deselection, downsizing, or right-sizing interview, don't go. It means you're fired, canned, sacked, cashiered, out of here. Scott Adams, author of The Dilbert Principle, worked for many years in corporate America. He writes, companies realized that they had to make downsizing sound like more of a positive development. This was accomplished through a process of inventing happier-sounding phrases that all meant essentially the same thing. You're fired. You're fired was the pre-1980s phrase. The 80s brought us you're laid off. The late 80s and early 90s saw the introduction of you're downsized, followed by the more recent you're right-sized. Adams cautions that your happy-sized and your splendid-sized are just over the horizon. Euphemisms and political correctness are funny, but they're also really serious attempts to manipulate your mind. So learning to avoid euphemisms, or at least recognize them, is tremendously important mental discipline, shaping and toning your convergent intelligence so that your synvergent intelligence can truly blossom. Balance also demands that we transcend sexual stereotypes. The left hemisphere is frequently associated with a more traditionally male way of looking at the world, analytical, focused, convergent. This is the mode for influencing the environment, for getting things done, for doing. On the other hand, the right hemisphere is often associated with the more traditionally female mode, the receptive, intuitive, and divergent. This is the mode for sensitivity to the environment, for letting things be, for being. To be whole, we must integrate the masculine and feminine principles. Oriental wisdom has long recognized that the balance of yin and yang, of being and doing, is a prerequisite for enlightenment. In the West, the importance of this integration is becoming apparent through research. In a landmark study at Stanford University, psychologists discovered that the highest levels of intellectual functioning are incompatible with stereotypes of masculinity and femininity. So, practice thinking synvergently. Move beyond compartmentalized either-or ways of looking at yourself and the world. Embrace the paradoxes of everyday life. Be a planner and an improviser. Balance substance and process, seriousness and play. Seek the synergetic integration of intuition and analysis, leadership and management, left brain and right brain, male and female. In 1980, my buddy Tony Buzan and I were flying from England to New England to lead a seminar together. Our client was generous enough to provide us with first-class tickets. After a sumptuous meal, the flight attendant came around with a dessert cart, and she asked us if we'd prefer a chocolate gâteau or an ice cream creation. When she asked Tony, he smiled, and with a twinkle in his eye, he said, "Both, please." At first, the attendant was taken aback, but then her expression softened into a smile. "Of course, sir." Would you care for a thriving economy, or do you prefer a viable environment? Can I interest you in advancing technology, or maybe instead you'd like to develop human resources? Would you like to be rich and successful, or would you prefer to serve humanity? The Synvergent thinker knows that the answer is both, please.
This is the end of Side 6. Side 5 is already queued up for your next listening.